Okay, apologies if we had a little technical glitch there. I hope everyone can hear me now. Good evening, I'm Liz Brown. I'm the chair of the York and District branch of the Geographical Association, and you're very welcome this evening to the last of our evening lectures in this year's programme. I've got a few announcements to make before I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. Firstly, I would like to remind people that unfortunately we had to cancel the sixth form conference. The reason for that is that we can't do it in person, and also because we don't know exactly what the exam boards are going to be setting in terms of assessments for our A-level students, we felt that having a morning based on exam technique probably wasn't that fruitful. So we've had to cancel that event. But Sheffield University, who are going to give us a suite of lectures this year, are going to put that on ice, and they'll do it for us next year. So that conference themed around globalization to fit in with the AQA specification should be happening next year. Secondly, we are contemplating making the programme for the next academic year, so 2021 into 2022, also a totally virtual experience apart from the sixth form conference. And if you've got any feedback on that, we'd love to hear from you. So if the being virtual has worked for you and it's been better, please let us know. If you'd rather be in person, if we can, then let us know that as well. You can email me at liz.brown@boothamschool.com, and I can take any of your comments there. Lastly, this evening in the notices, I'd just like to say a massive thank you, particularly to Luke Gilliver, our technician, without whom the virtual experience would definitely not have happened. If it had been left to me, no show, unfortunately. And I'd also like to thank Chris Jeffrey for allowing us to use Bootham as our platform for the events, even though they've been virtual. So thank you to Chris Jeffrey, who is the principal at Bootham School. So this evening, I am absolutely excited and overwhelmed to introduce to you Abi Hayward. And I'm especially excited because Abi actually came to Bootham School, and she was one of my geography students a long time ago. She left Bootham in 2012, which for many of you might remember is the Olympic year. Since then, Abi went to Sheffield University and she did a degree in zoology. And then she, after a couple of gap years, decided she wanted to train to be a journalist. So she studied for a master's in journalism at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And she's now still in Canada, but she's in Ottawa. So she's on a 5-hour time difference, and she's working for Canadian Geographic. So a warm welcome to Abi Hayward. Abi, are you there? Hello.
Thanks, Liz, for the lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's great to see you. And we're just fingers crossed all our technology works and we don't lose you. So the way it works this evening is that Abby's very kindly recorded a lecture just in case technology failed us. And you can put your questions into the chat during the evening and we'll have a look at those questions and hopefully Abby will be able to answer those at the end. And if you've got anything else you want to ask, any sort of questions about the setup or anything, just put them in the comments and we'll pick them up as we go along. So thanks, Abi, for being here and thank you for recording the lecture. And I think it's over to the recording and I'll see you after the lecture. Bye for now.
Hi, my name's Abi Hayward and I'm recording this talk in Ottawa, where I work as the assistant editor at Canadian Geographic magazine. I just wanted to first acknowledge that I'm pre-recording this talk on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people, who are the guardians of this land and have been in relationship to these lands since time immemorial. I'm really honoured to be giving this talk to you today. I'm going to be talking about a project that I worked on back in 2019, which was a project of the Global Reporting Programme, which is a global reporting centre based out of the University of British Columbia, where I was a master's student. So the projects that the GRC run, they try and cover kind of undercovered topics in journalism. And the year that I was there, we had been given some funding to look into seafood supply chains, which of course is actually a massive topic. So when you get given a topic as big as that, it's like, well, how to narrow in? And of course, so we went off and did a bunch of research, and something that we found that all the members of the team, which was an interdisciplinary team, we didn't know much about was fish meal. And what was shocking about fish meal was that 25% of all the world's fish catch ended up as it. And maybe I should backtrack a little bit and explain what fish meal is, because that's what this talk is going to center around. So basically, fish meal is ground up, usually smaller fish that are found in the ocean. So they grind it up and process it and turn it into powder. And then this fish meal powder is used, it has a bunch of uses actually. It is used in pet food and it is used in agriculture, but we focused around fish meal as fish feed. So basically that it's used to feed farmed fish, which is interesting actually as a little tangent, because fish farming was, conceived of almost as a way to stop overfishing in our oceans. So if we could raise them ourselves in farms, then that would surely be better than we're not overfishing in our own, natural habitats. But because fish meal is taken from, the natural environment and it's used to feed these farmed fish, then that's also a problem if we're overfishing the smaller fish that are used to feed fish like salmon. And I think it was quite shocking for all of us that, when you go to the supermarket and buy salmon, for instance, which is quite popular in the west coast of BC, which is where we were all living, but also, in the UK, you think you might be buying like a healthier option and a more sustainable option, but this is the fish that you don't know you eat, which is the name of the project. And so we decided that we were going to investigate the fish meal industry as our project. And so to do this, we wanted to kind of figure out where demand was coming from and where the supply was coming from, so we could kind of connect the dots there and start to investigate the impacts of the fish meal factory, both on the communities where the fish is sourced and also on the environment. And the more we investigated, the more we found really. And I'm going to concentrate mainly on West Africa, which is where I went as part of the team, but I'm also just going to explain the other places we went to because they're an important part of the story. So most of the world's demand for fish meal comes from China. Which has like the demand is only growing, like they're feeding like an increasingly middle class population. People like to eat fish there, and also like China is like an important place to export fish to the rest of the world too. So some of China's fish meal demand can be found within China. They get some of their own fish meal there, but they're also increasingly looking elsewhere to kind of help supplement this. So one of the biggest supply places, or the biggest supply country, I should say, is Peru. And the reason for this is that off the coast of Peru, they have like a very rich upwelling system. So it's like a cold upwelling system off the coast. And so like cold waters come up. And this means that like they have like a very rich stock of small fish. So off Peru, they have a very rich stock of anchovies. So China's getting a lot of their supply from Peru, and because Peru have been like well established in the industry for many years now, like it was somewhere we thought would be a good place to investigate there to see what the effect of the fish meal industry there is. And then the third place we went was West Africa, which I was part of that team. And so West Africa as a fish meal destination is less established than Peru is. That Peru is like much bigger. There are way less factories in West Africa, but it is a growing industry, and it's somewhere that the countries like China have, set their sights on as somewhere where they can get some of their fish meal supplies. So countries like Mauritania is a big one, Senegal, and also in the most recent, days was Gambia, the Gambia. So we as a team went to Senegal and the Gambia just to see like how like a kind of nascent industry is affecting the communities there and the environment there. So starting off with China, I just wanted to show you a short video that we took or the China team took while they were out in the field, just to kind of give you an idea of, what's happening there. And it's the scenes that you can kind of see at the port there. So I'm just going to share my screen.
This is Boha Port in southern China, and the fishing trawlers are back after weeks at sea. But the mountains of mackerel, sea bream, and sea bass unloaded here are not meant for human food. Instead, these so-called trash fish will be transported to local factories to make fish meal. The environmental organization Greenpeace estimates that it takes more than 1,000 of these small fish to raise one yellow croaker, a popular farm fish in China.
I remember the first time I saw photographs from some of these ports, I was actually appalled.
Scenes like this are happening daily at more than 20 ports along China's coastline.
I think the things that we're seeing in Boha is very typical across ports that land larger amounts of these trash fish across China.
Catching all these young fish before they've matured has serious impact.
70 to 75% or so are taken when they are in their juvenile phase, which means they don't have enough time to get big and reproduce.
Fishermen who make their living at Boha Port say fish populations are declining.
啲絕種多啊，多好多魚啲以前即係10幾年前啲魚好多啲魚啲冇有繁殖得到，冇有繁殖咁快，全部拖晒，冇辦法啊。
This decline is a problem that's having an impact on the whole fishing community.
越變一年比一年差啊！呢個行業啊，海水資源越嚟越少啦，嗰陣就到咗行業好難做啦。
Experts like Sadovi say fishing regulations in the South China Sea have not been enforced, and there are too many boats fishing in Chinese waters.
If I had to give a number grade between, say, 1 and 10 for fisheries management, probably give it around 2.
And this practice of catching these small fish is likely to persist as demand for seafood rises in China and around the world.
Most people would have no idea about where many of the aquacultured fish come from, farmed fish come from. It's probably one of the biggest challenges we have in fisheries.
So I think that just gives you some of the sense of the scale of this and what's happening, in China with its own fisheries, and kind of why a supply chain like this needs to kind of set its sights on other places in the world. And so I wanted to move on to Peru now, where obviously, as I mentioned, the fish meal industry has been going quite a while. And this is one of the clips that our team took there. And I'm just going to share my screen again.
Professor Loaiza of the National University of Santa in Chimbote studies the impact of fish meal pollution on the environment. Here, he uses an instrument to pull up a small sample of the vast amount of sludge accumulated on the ocean floor.
Wow. El lodo huele a sulfuro de hidrógeno. Ese es el olor que nosotros podemos percibir, ¿no? A huevos podridos.
Loaiza says this black substance is a combination of blood, scales, and fish remains.
O sea, el sustrato es totalmente inadecuado como para que se recupere la vida marina.
After decades of fish meal factories dumping their waste into the bay, the factories have finally stopped this practice and now treat their waste. But the lasting impacts remain to this place that was once a haven for locals.
El color de las aguas era en realidad turquesa, y la costumbre pueblerina era que el día domingo de verano, sábado y domingo de verano, toda la familia veníamos a la bahía, ¿no? Toda la familia. Yo de pequeñito nos íbamos a la playa, llevábamos limoncito, algo de sal, y sacábamos muyes, sacábamos moluscos. Esa era la vida de los chimbotanos en aquel entonces. De los chimbotanos ligados a su mar, y eso es lo que se ha roto. Los chimbotanos ahora miran muy poco a la bahía, mire cómo está la bahía, ¿no? O sea, ¿quién se podría fijar en la bahía para querer a la bahía así como está, ¿no?
And so I think that gives you some sense of the impacts that the fish meal industry is having in Peru. And maybe it's kind of like a foreshadowing of what is to come in other places if the same pattern is followed. You end up with this kind of sludge in the ocean that whose health impacts, we're still discovering. And in a place like Peru, where the anchovies are used for the fish meal, it's a bigger deal from an environmental point of view, and less such a big deal in terms of the food supply chain, because people in Peru don't tend to eat the anchovies as their main source of protein. The difference between Peru and then somewhere like the West Africa region, is actually the fish that are used for fish meal there are used as the main source of protein. It's a source of protein which is a cheap source of protein, and that's important for a lot of the communities along the coast. And it's not just eaten fresh, but it's also dried and processed by like the artisanal fish processors, many of whom are women. So the fish is dried and then exported inland, which is another source of it's a source of cheap protein for those inland like farming communities, which is it's cheaper than raising like meat, for example. So for a country like West Africa, like fish is everything, and that's what people told us when we went there. And like yeah, fish is there's a quote at the end of the story that we wrote, which kind of was like, if we don't have fish, then that's it. And you know, it's very tricky because a lot of people in those communities, they want to bring development to their communities, and so you know, when you're kind of promised like jobs and you know, income for that community, then like that's like obviously a very attractive prospect. But sometimes people aren't always thinking long term and thinking about, okay, well, where is the community going to get their main protein supply from? And also just, you know, things are less regulated there. So one of the fish meal factories that we were investigating there, they were actually closed down because they were found to not have been treating the water. So they were just dumping this like untreated effluent into the ocean. And so there was like, that was obviously met with resistance from the local communities. And actually the government like did say, okay, you know, you've got to close and you can open again once you've proved that you have built that waste water treatment plant, which is it was just one of those timing things when you're planning like a work of journalism and you're planning to tell a story. And we happened to visit that factory. So that this factory is in Sanyang in the Gambia, and we went there just as the factory was sort of setting up shop again. So they were starting to actually work, and so the communities there were pretty angry. Yeah, as I say, it was being met with like a lot of resistance. And before I talk about that some more, I just wanted to show a video so that you can kind of get a sense of like what fish really means in those communities in West Africa. We started off in Senegal, and this is where that part of the story starts. So I'm going to just share my screen again, just bear with me.
Joal Fadios, Senegal. The fishing frenzy here begins at the crack of dawn. Small-scale fleets land their catches at what is the country's biggest artisanal fishing port. Fishermen here and across Senegal fuel an industry that puts about 17% of the country's population to work. And this is how one man, Doudou Kote, has earned his living for more than 30 years. His fishing ritual starts here on the beach, with help from fellow fishermen. His boat is small, unsophisticated. It's called a pirogue. Today, the team of father and son is out in the sea to score some fish. At the first stop, the fish hook goes in. The sea offers nothing. We ride further into the sea and drop the anchor. Again, nothing. Doudou blames the increase in boats for the shortage of fish.
parce que tey fi tey gaal goo gis mu am benn pirogue si këram day bëgg bu déwénee wala quelque mois mu am beneen wala mu am ñaar léegi kii noonu bu yàggee day dem nag ba fi mu toll nii léegi géej gi dafay saturé géej gi liñ ko sëf la antanul xam nga léeg-léeg il faut nga sori pour mun a jàpp jën mais léeg-léeg nag doo sori te da ngay jàpp jën.
Dudu's strategy seems to work. There's fish, finally. But he warns that fishermen these days are tempted to sell to fish meal factories instead of taking it to the market. And this is putting even more pressure on the scarce resource.
Parce que boo xoolee lu gaal yi indi si mbaal si jën rek ñoom boo ñëwee si usine bi rek automatiquement dañ koy jënd te dañ koy jënd léegi fay la léegi loo indi rek da koy jënd Joal fii am na fi usine baa ngi fii si kay bi fii tout pare moom it aussi comme ça la naka noonu.
The factory Dudu talks about is this one, Omega. This Chinese-owned fish meal plant is close to the beach in Joal. These factories mostly deal in sardines, fish that would otherwise land up on plates as food.
The fish meal factory is a big problem in our country because the people feed on sardinella. And if we have no sardinella here, we'll never have other kinds of fish in Senegal. And the problem is a big part of the population living on sardinella. And without sardinella, it will be a problem here in Senegal.
Fish processors like Marianne, who rely on a steady supply of fish, are facing the heat from fish meal factories. Like many women in Senegal, Marianne dries and sells smoked fish. But lately, she's seen more and more of the good quality fish making their way into foreign-owned factories and not her oven.
On est dans un pays sous-développé. Nous n'avons rien. Or que les Chinois ont de l'argent, les Coréens ont des moyens, nous n'avons pas de moyens. Ils prennent le poisson direct à la mer et ils transforment ça là-bas.
Fish processing empowered Senegalese women and gave them financial independence. But Marianne fears that without access to fish, the good days are behind her.
Regarde derrière vous, ici c'était plein de femmes, plein de monde. Où sont les gens? Beaucoup d'entre eux sont restés chez eux parce que tu ne peux pas payer le billet le matin, le soir payer le billet, retourner à la maison sans rien faire. Tu es obligé de rester chez toi.
Back at the sea, staying at home is not an option for Dudu. He will set out on his boat once again tomorrow. But it's the next generation of fishermen, like his son, who will have to decide how far they are willing to go to make fishing their livelihood.
So I think you can see through that it's a big part of the community there, and just being on that beach, it's like quite indescribable actually. Like you go down there and they're waiting for the first boat of the day, and you can see someone running with a big box of fish on their back, and then as soon as they reach the land and then negotiating with the fish processors on the beach, it's just like it's like a frenzy of activity, and that's how the people make their living. And so if this kind of resource is a resource that's been taken and put into fish meal, then not only are they not getting the food to the local economy, but they're also not getting the profits from it. So they can sell their fish to the fish meal factories, and yes, they're going to get like the fishermen that are doing that are going to get like a bit more than they would probably from selling their catch inland. But the profits really and they're quite big profits that are being made by the fish meal industry, those are not being injected back into the local community because they're not owned by the the West Africans. Some of them are, some of them in Senegal are, I think that 2 of them in Senegal are, but other than that, they're all kind of owned by other countries. And it's kind of actually sometimes sketchy. So the fish meal factory that we went to in the Gambia, for example, we spent a long time actually figuring out who owned it, because it's very difficult to find online. So the people there told us, it's owned by China, but as a journalist, you really have to kind of fact check that. And so like I was just like digging through like online resources. I found that it was owned by a Mauritanian company, and I found this company on Facebook and messaged them on Facebook chat, and I was put in contact with a Mauritanian gentleman who we messaged on WhatsApp for a bit, and I was, you kind of have to be polite, and so I was saying like, I'd really like to talk to the owner if that's possible, and they were saying not possible. And eventually we had them on the phone, this guy, and there was a team of 4 of us in the room. There was myself, and then my partners in the investigation. There was a guy who could speak Arabic, there's a guy who could speak French, and there was a girl who was Chinese too. And so eventually this Mauritanian guy who was talking in a mix of Arabic and French to one of my partners, he said, okay, yep, I'll put you in contact with the owner. And so we actually got to speak to the owner, and we discovered that yes, the people who were there on the ground were right, it was Chinese owned. And so we got to speak to the owner, who was speaking in Chinese, and my friend was having to translate as we were asking him questions like, why did he decide to open the fish meal factory in West Africa? And he said, oh, because it's cheaper there. Cheaper kind of labor wise, and also the product itself is cheaper. And so it's kind of it's interesting how like different people view it, and it was just an interesting experience for me, and like how you make decisions as a journalist. One of the tough decisions that we had to make when we were in the field in Gambia was whether or not to film, because just the presence of a camera sometimes has the tendency to make people do what they might not otherwise do. Sometimes people perform for the cameras, especially when they have a message. They know that message is being broadcast to a larger audience. And so me and my reporting colleagues were taking a break at this fish shack. We'd kind of befriended the owner, the proprietor, Salim, who he like would serve up fish to the tourists there. Anyway, so we saw a bunch of activists who we'd met the day before picking up shovels and heading to the beach where the pipeline was, and we just knew that they were going to do something. And so there was that decision, like, do we follow them and do we film what they're doing, or do we just sit there? And the decision was made. I called my producer and said, like, what do I do? And he was like, well, I think you should get the stories. So so we followed them to the pipeline, and they dug it up out of the ground. And I just wanted to show you the footage that we got of that, and the kind of the activists who we actually happened to have interviewed the day before, kind of sharing like their perspectives on the fish meal factory in their community. So.
It is a country whose very borders were determined by the resources within them. A country whose white sand beaches and hospitality earned it the nickname the Smiling Coast of Africa. And it is a country at a crossroads. Turn one way and the Gambia can continue to nurture a thriving tourism sector, or turn the other way and promote economic development through further resource extraction. Nowhere is this more true than the small fishing village of Sanyang, which in November of 2017 saw its tiny community changed forever when the Nassim fish meal factory opened its doors.
This factory is making people sick. When you inhale it for 1 hour, you end up sick. Everybody knows that here. And when this continue, at the end, you will see nothing here. There will be no nature, there will be no trees, there will be no people, because we cannot live.
The factory recently completed the construction of a wastewater pipe that would send allegedly treated effluent into the sea. Despite public outcry, the pipe is the last step before the factory resumes operations.
This is why we are complaining. We are not even complaining now, we are fighting against the factory. So we come together to make sure that we don't have it because of the affection that it's going to bring or the destruction that the factory is bringing.
But this isn't the only time the factory has tried to lay a wastewater pipe.
They dig it for the first time and the village said they don't want it. So we went there to close it because we know after putting the pipe in the sea, that is our sickness or that is our death. After that we went, so they come back the next day, they dig it again. After we went there, we dig it, we bury it, we put back the sand back. And the third day they come again with paramilitaries. They said they're going to dig it by force. We told them, no, you cannot dig it because the law don't tell you to dig it. Like the village don't give you the procedure to go on with your work. And you want to dig it by force. So this is why we are trying to stop you.
Leave it in the water, man. We are coming back again.
So, despite the efforts of the activists there, that they built the pipeline again, and they continued to operate. Is also one of those kind of interesting things in journalism is like when you finish telling that story, because we had to finish the project, had to be executed, we had to get it online and get it out there. Like the story continues playing out, and I continued for many months. I'm still in contact with some of the people in Sanyang, and they would send me videos of the beach just littered with dead fish. Because one of the things that we didn't record while we were there, but we kind of knew from other places that it might be happening, is that the fish meal factories can only process so much fish at one time too. So once they've had enough fish for the day, they can't process any more, and so they just turn people away. So these fishermen that have been going out in their pirogues, they come back and they say, no, we can't process any more. And so a lot of this fish just gets dumped. Like it doesn't get eaten by people. It's too late at this point. So you just get these piles of stinking fish outside of the fish meal factories. And one of our sources, who was like he operated a kind of restaurant, a hotel there, just sent us videos which were quite shocking of just beach like littered with dead fish. And so the onus is kind of put on government agencies to better regulate these fish meal plants. And we spoke to the permanent secretary of fisheries in the Gambia, and he was a smart man, and he was very like agile in how he answered questions. But he did say during the interview, perhaps like the right thing was not to have given them permission in the first place to operate. But now they're here, we kind of just have to regulate them the best way that we can. And some of them are better. Like there have been problems before, and there was a system where they would put up a flag, for example, to say, okay, we don't need any more fish today, and then so less fish was wasted that way, like simple things like that. But the reality is that these plants are probably going to continue to grow. And so like in the future, especially, as climate change like increases desertification in Africa and the desert grows westwards, those kind of sources of like agriculture are going to be less, and so people are going to be pushed towards the coast. But then of course like the resources at the coast are also kind of being taken away. So a lot of these people are kind of in like a catch-22 situation. Is like what else is there to do apart from fishing, apart from continuing to fish, is going to take away the resource that so many people depend on. So yeah, it's a really like tough situation in West Africa, and so part of the project focused on some of the solutions and where we could possibly look to get fish meal from other sources. I mean, like an obvious solution would maybe to be like, don't buy farmed fish for the consumer. It's very difficult for consumers to make decisions that, like, it would have to be a lot of people that would take action to have that effect. And so looking more practically then is like, okay, well, if people are going to continue to eat farmed fish, it's like, well, where are we going to get that fish meal from? And there are a bunch of programs in place. Some people are looking into using soy as an alternative as the protein source instead, which is, not a bad plan. But then when you look at where soy comes from and you look at, deforestation and how many chunks of the rainforest are being chopped down to, allow production of soy, like perhaps that's not the best solution. There's other solutions which are looking at using waste fish instead. But then you kind of end up almost with the problem that they have back in China, like they're using these trash fish, but then actually like that's not really great for like the rest of the ecosystem, because if you're taking out, like parts of the smaller fish, for example, there's going to be like cascades, and if you're taking all the juvenile fish, then the fish population isn't going to reproduce very well. So like that could be a solution if it was done properly, but at the moment it's maybe not looking that viable. The other solution is using they kind of manufacture a protein from seaweed, which actually is being put in place by a bunch of organizations, and I think a few producers in the UK are saying we're only using fish that have had like fish meal fed to them with this content rather than wild fish. So that's it's not like there aren't solutions that could be implemented, but it is still very much a work in progress, and like until really, like, my opinion is until you can kind of like curb that demand, I don't really know where this is going to go, which is a bit of a negative note to end on. But I would just like to thank you for listening to this, and if you want to find any more about the story, because like the story that there's so much more than what I could kind of fit into like a 40-minute talk, so you can go to the globalreportingprogram.org/fishmeal, and you can read the story that we produced and find out some more about that, because it's actually a really interesting topic. Like, you say fish meal and you're like, what's that? But it's an industry that stretches across the world, and way more so than just the countries we covered. I mean, we only had like a certain budget, so we couldn't go everywhere. Norway would have been an interesting one to go to too, because of course they have like a massive fish farming industry. Scotland too. Like, there were so many places that we could have gone, but as I said, then we had to kind of limit it to these three. But thank you so much for watching this talk. I think there's going to be a live Q&A on the night, so you can ask questions, and I will do my best to answer them as best I can, whether they be about fish meal or about the reporting process, whatever. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, Abi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant talk, and I really enjoyed the video clips going through as well. I think the bad weather has certainly perhaps affected our listener and viewer numbers. So I'm not sure, I don't think we've had any questions come into the chat, but I just wanted to reflect on some of the things you've told us about, and maybe you can answer a couple of my questions. And you kind of alluded and got towards some of my questions at the end there. One of the things that was really interesting was the journalist ethics, and a lot of the people who watch these GA lectures are A-level students, And when they do their project, their non-examined assessment piece of work, they have to consider the ethics of what they do. And that was just really interesting, that kind of ethical code that you've got as a journalist and the questions you have to ask about whether it is ethical to pursue a story, to film, and to ask certain questions. And I wonder if you could share any more sort of insight into any other instances where you had to make that call. I mean, you talked about you weren't sure whether to film the activists there. Were there any other times during this story that you kind of had to question the ethics?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I feel like as a journalist, you're kind of making ethical decisions all the time, like who you're choosing to interview, like who you're choosing to talk to, who you're not choosing to talk to, who you decide to actually put in to the story in the end. And a lot goes on the cutting room floor, unfortunately. Like, you know, one of the decisions that was made was I really wanted to focus on the role of women in fisheries, because it is such an important part of women's empowerment. And of course we have the scene with Marianne, and she's like a powerhouse of a woman, but they all are. And there was a scene on Sanyang Beach that we filmed, which didn't make it in the end. And it just showed like how smart and how much they really understood the industry, and they understood what was happening to their community. This isn't really answering your question, but it just came to mind, so I'm just telling you.
That's good.
Yeah, and we were I was talking to one woman, and then I don't know where they appeared from, but like it felt like all women from the village they knew we were there, like because by that point we'd been there a few days and they knew who we were, because we were like the two like white people there with cameras, and and yeah, they were just like, you know, they wanted to voice their opinions. So I'm trying to think, like whether to show people's faces is one as well, like getting people's permission. You have to, for all the footage we got and for all the interviews we got, we had to get people to sign releases. And so it was important to explain to them, like in their own language, like what exactly that meant and what they'd be appearing in and like who might be watching.
And there's some big players, aren't there? So, you know, that it could be quite risky for some of these people to take part in your films. I mean, you know, this is the global reporting program, so it's out there. Once it's out there, you know, you can't take it down. So I had another question, which again you sort of came to at the end, which was about, you said about the growing. At the beginning, you said about the growing middle classes in China and this demand for fish. But I mean, the global population is growing, and there's a lot of people eating fish. And we hear a lot in the climate change story about, well, it would be really great if we ate less meat. But we don't often hear people talking about fish specifically. But clearly what you're telling us is actually it would be much better for the planet if we did eat a bit less fish globally. Is that right? Do you think that's right, or do you think that's too strong?
I mean, it's tricky because, you know, I think for me, like the decisions that I've made, for example, as a consumer after doing this project, I still eat fish, but I think about the fish that I'm eating, and whether you're eating if you're eating a carnivorous fish like a salmon, you're eating a fish that has fed on like thousands of other fish to be alive. So like maybe eating a salmon isn't great, but if you eat like a lower trophic level fish, like an anchovy or like a sardine, then your impact is slightly less. I think we need to ask big questions, because like the fish meal is only a tiny part of the picture. Like overfishing in general has been like a problem, like everywhere. There's been fisheries like collapse, you know, like the California ecosystem like completely collapsed in the 60s. Like in the 30s, you have like Steinbeck's Cannery Row, and he's talking about these rivers of fish, and then like 30 years later it collapsed. And that's why they actually turned to Peru in the first place as like an alternative, you know, source of where to get the fish from a different kind of upwelling current, because they just wrecked the one in California. And the same thing happened in Namibia too, and it was totally overfished, and so and into the void came jellyfish into this void, and so there was a sea of jellyfish, and then it's very difficult for the fish to kind of reestablish themselves there because the jellyfish are then eating their eggs, and so once you do overfish a system, it's very difficult to kind of bring it back from the brink, and you have to have very like strict like fisheries management, and you know, illegal fishing is a thing as well, like unregulated fishing is a thing. I wouldn't want to say a complete ban on eating fish would make the world a better place, because some communities, that's where they get their food from. Yeah, it's their livelihood, and that's where they get their food from. And I would like to imagine a world where it's just managed better.
And I suppose that's the other thing, that if we consider the oceans to be global commons, which a lot of people do, I know that, you know, there's a lot of you know, countries want to take ownership of the oceans close to their country borders, to their coastlines, but the main oceans are part of the global commons, but they are simply not governed effectively. And that's, I think, where technology into the future is going to really potentially really help through all sorts of geospatial data and mapping, you know, data collection and data mapping, to actually work out what's going on in the ecosystems and who's doing what where, because the oceans are a hell of a big place, aren't they? And people can get away with a huge amount when they're out there fishing. And obviously in your reports, you're focusing on what people are bringing back to shore, but there may be whole other stories about what people jettison when they're out at sea and the sort of practices that happen. It was quite poignant watching the guys off Senegal just line fishing with those simple lines, and then bringing on board such small fish, really, compared to what the big trawlers can do. It's kind of, you know, I'm sure they can see and they do know what happens in other parts of the world, but that must be heartbreaking for them when they're doing such a sustainable small amount individually, you know, just bringing in by line. I'm looking at the time there, Abi, and I'm just going to check and ask Luke. Luke, is there anything I'm missing? Are there any questions that I'm missing anywhere? I'm just going to check. Here's a question come up here. So Rani's got a question. Did the company ever manage to install a waste pipe in the Sanyang community? So did that fish meal factory re-establish that pipeline?
Yeah, it did. It got put back quite quickly, actually. Not while we were there, but like quite swiftly afterwards. Because it's hard, isn't it? Because like these companies have the backing of the government too. Like the government have said, like, yes, like you're bringing income to our country, and like really, like the activists, what they did was illegal, and there had already been the investment that by that point they had all the permits, like they tested the wastewater. Apparently they'd sent the samples off to a laboratory in Dakar and had the samples tested. So like, and we talked to the government about that too, and they said, you know, like we've tested them. So theoretically the wastewater should be clean, but yeah.
Clearly the community did not want that there, though, did they? A lot of the community. That was a great question. Thank you, Rania. So Oliver's got a question here. Can you see fish being a sustainable source of food in the future if we carry on overfishing? I'll let you handle that one, Abi. I think you've partly
discussed that like a little bit, but like, can it be sustainable? Yes. I think it can be if it's just managed right. And I think that, like, you know, should be really, like, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it's like, well, if countries get most of their income from the natural resources they have, then that's where they get their income from. And so like, you could say, you know, like why should ships from UK or Norway or China or, you know, wherever else be fishing in, you know, African waters? And it's just like, well, income, but then they take so much, and then that's not good for the ocean in general, and not great for that country, like in the long run either. I feel like I can't really answer that question.
It is a difficult question, but I think one of the things that we do know is that it's perfectly possible to manage fisheries effectively. We can see that where I know you're saying it is difficult if you let an ecosystem collapse completely, but if you can get in before it's completely damaged, you stop fishing and you stop fishing the juveniles, you can, fisheries can re-establish. And we've seen as well in recent years with the sort of marine conservation zones where there's simply no catch allowed in certain areas, that fisheries around those zones absolutely thrive. I mean, York University has in the Department of Environment, Cam Wilson there has done a lot of work, around marine conservation. So it's kind of a topic that's been big at in York, although we're not near the sea, but that investigation and looking at that work. So it's possible, but it's whether the governance and the will, to make that happen is going to be in place. And then Chris Spence asked a question, are any particular species of fish being identified as in a critical state? And I guess Chris means in any of these, I mean, why don't we just say, so we heard the conservationists say off the coast of China, and the fishermen were saying, they recognise that some species have gone extinct there. And I know you weren't in Peru very long, but when you were in the Gambia, was there any local sort of anecdotal evidence about any of the fish that were endangered there? Or do we know if there's any research even into that in that area?
Yeah, no, there's definitely research going on, and I almost wish that I could bring so the guy that you saw being interviewed, Alassane Samba, he is the man, he knows all the stuff. He's been researching this stuff for ages, and the fish that you heard him talking about they call it sardinella. It's like a sardine basically. And so in these ecosystems, they're not particularly diverse ecosystems. There aren't that many different species of fish that make up these smaller pelagic things. But the species that they are there are actually really important for the upper levels species of fish. So it's not, there are still a lot of fish. And I think that's what's tricky to kind of explain. If you put a camera underwater and looked at the shoals of these fish, there are lots and lots and lots and lots of fish. There are just way less than there used to be in the past. And so these fish like sardinella or the anchoveta in Peru, they're not listed as endangered by any means by COSIWIC, they're not endangered, but there's just less of them than they should be. And in an ecosystem where they have so much importance, that's not good.
It's a serious issue, yeah. And like you say, when you think about the trophic levels, those fish are supporting fish at a higher level, which will be endangered more quickly, won't they, if they haven't got their food sources. Got two more questions come in. Laura's asking about the community in Peru. Could the community in Peru begin fishing again now that the effluent is being treated? So that was in the bay where they were putting the sludge. I wasn't clear about in the film whether they were fishing off that coast much anymore, or whether they were boats or whether they were fish farms. I wasn't sure what we were looking at. But maybe...
Yeah, so they have a huge fleet off Peru, and they are still fishing. That was just one bay. I feel like I can't really speak to Peru very often, very much, because I wasn't on that team. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, that they are still fishing. I mean, they're the biggest fish meal supplier in the world. So
I was just going to say, for any students out there, you'd only have to look at a map of ocean currents around the world, and anytime you find a cold ocean current which is upwelling and bringing those nutrients from the bottom of the ocean to the surface, that's where you're going to find these fish meal factories, isn't it? Because that's where all the small fish are that are then feeding. And coincidentally, of course, that's always going to mirror the kind of migration patterns of the whales, isn't it? Because they follow the krill, and the small fish, are feeding on the krill. Anyway, I just kept thinking about that during the talk about what's going on for the whales. Helen McLean asked the question: is there an alternative of food for the fish aside fish meal? I know you mentioned soy. Is there any consideration of using insects as a source of protein?
Yes, and as I watched my own talk back, I realized that I had forgotten to mention insects. But insects are actually a big avenue. A lot of the big fish meal companies are looking into using insects as a source of that protein. So good question. The only thing is, you can get the protein from the insects, but you kind of have to supplement it with other things, because like what you're getting from the fish is not just the protein, but you're also getting these like rich fatty fish oils too, which are where like, you know, the farm fish or, you know, are getting their nutrients from. So it's about kind of supplementing that. But yes, that is definitely an avenue that they're looking into, or actually that they are using.
Yeah, well, good, because I did eat a couple of insects on a holiday a couple of years ago. Deliberately, I was offered them; they were cooked. I found them fairly challenging. It was slightly dark, which was helpful to me because I didn't have to see them close up. But I didn't enjoy that, and I think being really honest, as a pescatarian, I'd much prefer to eat a piece of fish than I would some insects. So if we can convert insects into the nice fish, then that would be a joyous story for me. I guess we'd have to also ask, though, what on earth would the insects be eating? How would we generate so many insects? And what? But I guess I hope
that is a good. It's a bigger question, I think, as well, because like insects as a food system is something that people I think are quite squeamish about. But like, we could be eating insects. You did. Locusts. They were like little cricket things. I didn't think they were that bad. I had them with a spicy sauce. I didn't mind them. Even in the supermarkets these days, you can see like bags. Like I think it's in the crisps aisle. Like I'm pretty sure like I've seen like insect like crisps, but you can get them.
Okay. Well, I never thought we'd end the talk on this, but there we go. Insect snacks.
Good idea.
This will be your next story, Abi. Well, thank you very much for fantastic questions that have come into the chat there. That's been absolutely brilliant. And thank you, Abi, for giving up your time. I know Abi is having today her first afternoon off since she started her new job in Ottawa last year. And she's treated herself to, because of lockdown rules where she is, a visit to the supermarket and giving a talk for the York GA. So Abi, a big round of applause from me and from everybody else watching, and a big thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed that, and I'm sure everyone else listening and watching at home has as well. So thank you very much. From us here at the York GA, think about where you buy your fish, think about what that fish might have eaten, and try and buy sustainably wherever you can. Keep safe, and here's to everyone getting the vaccine against COVID soon. We hope to see you in the autumn. Okay, take care, everybody. Bye.